Welcome to this week's webinar. We'll probably give it a minute or two. I see folks joining in. In the meantime, if you can't hear me well or any technical issue, please write it on the Q&A or the chat. We'd be happy to assist. We'll just give it a few more seconds and we'll start in a bit. All right, cool. So I think we're ready to get started, everyone. Great. So welcome to Satori's Data Access Automation webinar. My name is Yoav. I'm the co-founder and CTO over here at Satori. And what we'll be covering today is what's customer data and why should we care about protecting customer data? What drives us to do that? We're going to look at what it really costs us to manage access to customer data, specifically in the cloud, specifically in platforms like RDS. We're going to look at some common use cases that we see from our customer base, common use cases for cases where you have to really manage access to data, specifically customer data well. And we're going to run through a demo of Satori showing you how Satori can solve these common use cases in a very simple and easy way. So let's get right into it. So when we think about customer data, is actually any piece of data that you might be collecting, storing, processing, analyzing as part of your business that is related to your customers. So things like email addresses, phone numbers, home addresses are considered PII, personally identifiable information. Things related to health of your customers can be considered PHI, personal health information. Think about blood type, allergies, test results, genomic data, and so on. Financial data, obviously for financial services and fintechs, that's really, really important to protect. And anything related to how your customers, your users behave on your platforms, like their purchases, their ride history, and so on. So customer data is really many things, and companies that collect, process, store, and do stuff with customer data really have to think about how they protect it. And we see three main drivers for companies to take care of that customer data and protect it. The first is anything around regulation. So these are laws and restrictions and all these requirements that we're obliged to meet as part of us being operating in certain jurisdictions. So you all know about frameworks like GDPR, CCPA, and others in other jurisdictions in the world. Common requirements that we see coming out of these frameworks, generally speaking, is access to customer data should be audited. So you should be able to, in retrospect, say who had access to customer data. And personal data should be protected, meaning it shouldn't be available just upfront to anyone who just wants to use it. So companies usually use things like masking, tokenization, or encryption to protect that personal data. The second driver for companies, organizations to think about protecting customer data is compliance. These are frameworks that companies decide to comply with in order to prove to their customers that their operations, their service, their development lifecycle meets a certain high standard. Very common, we see ISO 27001, SOC 2, Type 2, and others. These frameworks usually say that access to customer data should be on a need-to basis and only for the purpose of delivering the service. So whenever your employees have access or they access customer data, you need to show that they do it for a really good reason and a proper purpose. Usually we also see requirements like engineers should not have access to production databases. Specifically in SOC 2, this is very common. Separation of duty, separation of concerns between engineering and operations. So, but we all know that engineers do need to have access to production databases to support the service, and we'll show you how we can do that very easily with Satori. Lastly, all sorts of contractual requirements. This is very common in B2B companies. The first two drivers are generally speaking, applied to most companies. Contractual requirements is really for B2B, specifically for B2B, where you sign contracts with your customers that include certain restrictions or certain requirements on you as a vendor to protect customer data. So we often see things like access to customer data should be granted for a limited period of time. So if you do need to provide access to my data, make sure it's time bound. It's not just granted and then never revoked. And again, being able to demonstrate that who had access to the data and why speaks to the auditing requirement of access to customer data. So these are really good drivers for businesses to protect customer data. Honestly, it's the right thing to do. Our customers, they trust us with their information. They want us to deliver the value to them, but they want their privacy to be respected. They want their data to be protected. Now, if we were to really, as an organization, think about what we need to do to comply with these requirements and to protect customer data and make sure that access to that data is compliant and complies with all these requirements, it's a pretty heavy lift if you think about it. And to show you what we think this costs an organization, and this is coming from our customer base, people we talk to that have not used Satori in the past are using Satori now, and that's how they helped us quantify this. So let's look at these assumptions. Let's say that we have an organization with 1,000 employees who need access to data from time to time. And let's say that out of these 1,000 users, on average, a user needs access to customer data once a month. I think it's pretty modest, but for the sake of the argument and calculation, this works out great. Whenever someone needs access to customer data, they have we need to complete or implement two tasks. One is granting the access, and the second is revoking the access. And let's just say that it takes, on average, 15 minutes to go and do that. I think that's also kind of modest, not counting, the back and forth and the discussions. And I'm only looking at a DevOps engineer or a DBA or an admin needing to go to the AWS console or the database and do the actual operation there in a pretty routine way, without having to learn anything new or to think about this. So if we take a look at how much time it consumes from the organization, 1,000 users once a month leads to 12,000 requests per year. Each request includes 2 tasks. Every task is 15 minutes. We end up with 6,000 hours of effort per year. Now, 6,000 hours per year divided by 8 hours per normal working day, you get 750 working days, which translates in, on average, to almost 3 years of effort to properly manage access to customer data under these assumptions for that type of organization, that big of an organization. If you think about this in dollar terms, it means that you have to hire 3 full-time engineers. That's going to cost you well over $400,000 per year just to manage, to be compliant, really compliant, and do the right thing for your customers and make sure that their data is actually available for everyone to use. Now, when we translate this into dollar amount, it's scary. It's a big number. So let's look at, well, we understood this is costly. We understood this is, potentially complex. Let's look at the common use cases that we see with companies that we talk to around managing access to customer data. So the first use case, support engineers, support personnel need access to customer data. From time to time, in order to troubleshoot or complete a support ticket, a support engineer would need some access to customer data because the data that person needs is not available via the application or the normal tooling that is available at that time. And we've all been there in those situations. So what options do we have as an organization to meet this need? Option A, not good. Everyone has upfront access to all customer data. This is super insecure, high risk of a breach. We've seen it in the past few months, several breaches that resulted in loss and leakage of customer data because social engineering techniques were applied on support engineers or software engineers, and data got leaked. It's very, very hard to show compliance and convince your auditors that you really need this and you don't have a way around it. Option B, access is only granted as needed, which is basically what we described. You have a support ticket, someone needs, you need access to that data, you open a ticket with DevOps, they have to go through the process of granting access to data. This is obviously way better than just having access provided upfront to everyone, but it slows things down. It slows support engineers from resolving customer tickets. It results in employee and customer frustration because everything gets delayed. So this is the first use case. Second use case, just-in-time and temporary access to production. Well, we've all been there. 3 a.m., you get paged, you wake up, you open the laptop, something's crashing in production, and you need access to the database to understand what's going on. Again, 2 options. Option A, where we see that in less mature organizations that have not yet started this journey of protecting customer data. Engineers just have access to production databases. Again, same with support engineers, high risk of a breach, very, very insecure, very hard to show compliance and convince your auditors that this is the right thing to do. I think it was easier in the past, but from my experience with auditors and what I hear from customers, this is getting a lot harder to justify. Option B, again, access is granted on a need-to basis by DevOps. This is great, but it also means you need to have your DevOps team on call just to go and open access to databases at 3 a.m. That's not a great experience, not for the DevOps folks, not for the engineers waiting to get access, and not for the business that is suffering because there is an outage that is not being handled on a timely manner. Third use case, it's an interesting one, and it touches all the data users in some way or another, and that is elevated access to PII data. Now, let's assume that you took the effort and implemented some sort of a data protection technique on your customer data. Could be dynamic masking, could be encryption or tokenization. But now, it could be a production issue, it could be a support ticket. Someone needs access to the real data, to the raw data. So what options do we have to implement that? Either we copy the data, we have one database with the raw data, one database with the protected data, or we implement database reviews. It depends on the type of environment. And usually when we talk about AWS RDS and databases like Postgres and MySQL and the others, we talk about production environments. Usually duplicating the data or creating views is less common there. You might duplicate to a different database, and you have to take care of anonymizing all the data when you replicate the data. It's very complex. It's doable, but it takes time to maintain. It's complex to operate. A lot of human, very error prone from a human mistake perspective. And I have war stories. We can if we get a chance to share a beer, I have a lot of war stories about mishaps in production databases. Anyway, not that great. Option B, we see some companies use this. It's not a bad option, I think, but it creates, basically what it means is creating all these interfaces. Could be APIs, could be UIs, could be tooling around access to customer data. So I was talking to one of our customers this week, and they showed me that they have this really great screen in their application for their engineers to get access to special tools and APIs that they use to debug the system. But this is, that's a development project. They have to go and build this thing. They need to support this. There's always not enough resources to invest in these tools. And so at the end of the day, it's an ad hoc solution to a specific problem. It takes time to maintain and continuously develop. So it's not the best option in my mind. So 3 use cases. Let's jump into Satori, and let me show you how Satori can help. So what is Satori? So we're here to solve all these things that all these problems that I shared with you. We're all about getting you the data you need when you need it in a secure, monitored, and audited way. We provide analytics about who's accessing what data, why they're doing that. We have a self-service access portal and integrations around accessing data for end users to really quickly go and request access to the data that they need. And obviously, we take care of the policy enforcement in a really transparent and innovative way across a large number of databases, including AWS RDS and others. So without further ado, I think we can go and jump into the demo. Just reminding you that if you have a question, and I see a few questions popping up in the Q&A already. If you have a question that you would like me to cover, feel free to post it on the Q&A. Cool. So let's jump into the demo, and I'll just move to share my desktop so you can all see all of the things that I have to show you. Yep. Nope. All right. Cool. So this is the Satori Management Console, and in this demo, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover those 3 use cases, and I'm going to operate here in this screen as a DevOps engineer, basically the Satori administrator who's using the system. And I'm going to have a support engineer and a software engineer on a different window that I'll drag here so you can see it really well. So what I have here on the management console for Acme guitars on Satori Rock On, it's basically pretty bare bones. I just added a Postgres RDS instance here. You can see this is on AWS USD2. This is the Satori hostname, which I'll use to connect to instead of connecting directly to the database as a user using my trusted data grip tool here. And other than that, it's pretty empty. I'm going to do all the config right here with you live. So first use case that we want to implement is support engineers who need access to customer data to resolve a ticket. Now, what I'm going to use to do that, to implement that, is a new really cool feature that we built that's called the Access Manager. And the Access Manager really simplifies the process for me as an admin to go and implement these use cases really, really fast. So let's do that. So I have two groups defined here on my system. I have a support group and an engineering group, and I have a user on each. So let's go through the steps of defining the user and the access level, selecting the data, and implementing the policy one by one. So I want support engineers to be able to grant themselves access to data on a self-service, in a self-service way. So they will only have to audit their access. They will have to request access. And they're going to get read-only access to the data. And I'm going to give them access to 1 day. So after a day, Satori is going to automatically revoke their access. I don't have to go in and do that for them. By the way, if I would want to give access for a longer period of time, we also support this really cool feature of saying, well, you can give them access to 90 days, but if they don't use the access, because Satori, we have access analytics, we know who's using what data, we can actually go and revoke it if they're not using. So it's like use it or lose it kind of thing. But for our use case now, 1 day, self-service read only, that's pretty good. I'm going to select here my database. For simplicity, I'm just going to use control access to the entire Postgres cluster. And I want to protect sensitive data here because I'm giving support engineers self-service access to the data. I want to make sure that personal data is protected. I'm going to use a masking policy here. So I'm going to create a new security policy and select one of our preset masking profiles, which I'll show you in a second. And basically that's it. I'm going to save my policy, and let me show you the masking profile and what it means. The masking profile is basically really cool. It's a mapping of data types to how I want them to be anonymized. And you can see I'm going to hash a bunch of PHI data here. I'm going to replace a bunch of PII data here. And you'll see that Satori can do that really in a very seamless way. So we have our first use case implemented. Let's call on James from the support team and have him access the data. So I'm going to minimize this. And I'm going to call James. So now I'm logged into Satori using James, and James, or as James. James is support engineer. You can see him here in Acme Guitars. And you can see that when James logs into the Satori data portal, he now sees an available data set here that he can access. So if I click on it, we can see that James has an option. It's just one option because we defined one rule for read-only access using self-service and a security policy that is applied on the access. And James had to provide a reason. So he's going to say, I'm working on ticket number 123, need access to data that is not available in the app. Typos included. And I'm requesting access to the data. And as you can see, the data set jumped here to my data, and access was granted because of the self-service access rule that we defined in Satori. So all I have to do now is I have to grab my temporary credentials here. I'm going to go into my data grip, which is pointing to my Satori hostname. And other than that, it's just a normal Postgres connection. I'm going to give it a second to connect, and let's try to run a query and see how this looks like. And this is great. You can see no delay or anything. I get access to the data, and all the sensitive data according to the masking profile has been completely removed or redacted, anonymized, hashed, depending on what we chose. So this is really nice. Let me show you something really cool using the masking profile. I'm gonna go back in as the admin here and just show you how cool and easy Satori's masking policy is. I'm gonna remove masking from blood type, and where's allergies? And allergies, just to show you that everything happens in a dynamic way without having to go and copy the data or anything like that. I give it a few seconds to propagate. I'm gonna run the query again. And as you can see, allergies and blood type are now available to me, and the rest of the data is kept secure. And the concept of a masking profile is really that you can define different set of glasses for different roles, for different purposes, and then you can just use them in the Satori policies in a very easy way and make sure that people only get access to the type of sensitive data that they need access to. All right, so this is really nice. I'm going to disconnect James here, and I'm going to go back as the admin because I want to implement the second use case. Reminding you, the second use case is just-in-time and temporary access to production. Now, this is really an easy use case to implement. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create another self-service access rule for my engineers. So we have the engineers here. I'm going to create a self-service access rule, but this time I'm going to provide them with full access because, 3 a.m., it's an emergency, like break glass kind of thing. They might need access to, to go and run DML, DDL queries and change stuff on the database to resolve the issue. This time, I'm not going to give them access to 1 day. It's just going to be 3 hours because, that's enough, and it's going to be revoked after 3 hours. I'm going to use the same data, and I'm going to use the same policy as I used before. That's good for us. I still want to make sure that sensitive data is protected. So I have my rule set here, and I'm going to log out and log back in as our software engineer. His name is Dave. Hey, Dave, help us out here with the demo. Great. So like before, this is now Dave from Acme Guitars. But now you can see that the available rule that Dave has is full access, full service, and the policies. I'm going to select that. And he's working on Jira ticket 123. Query failures in prod. He's going to request the access, and access is granted right away because of the self-service access rule. I'm going to grab my save credentials. And let me quickly go and log in as Dave. And I should be connecting. Good, I see more people have joined. And we have a bunch of questions already posted. I'm running the same query. I should see the same data because it's the same policy as before. You can see this data is in the clear, but the rest of the sensitive data is protected, which pretty much makes sense. You want usually you don't want to identify the actual people behind the data, but sometimes you're going to need to look at different items of data that is related to them. Cool. So we implemented the use case for engineers to go in and get full access, but sometimes folks need access to the raw data because maybe for the engineers, maybe there's a character issue or an issue related to encoding or characters, and they actually need to go and look at some of the data. Maybe we have a friend here at Satori who loves to put emojis everywhere. It might create break some stuff in our application, so we want to take care of that. So I'm going to create. I'm going to go back, and I'm going to create another rule for the engineering team that they can get access to full access to raw data. This is like the break glass kind of scenario. And here I'm going to say no security policies. So I'm going to store this. I'm going to save this one. And I'm going to go back as Mr. Dave. And I'm going to look at the available options that I have now. You can see I have this new option of full access requires approval from the owner of the data and no security policies. I'm going to do that now just to show you how it looks like on the admin side. Jira 456, bad character in patient name, need to see actual data. I'm requesting access. Now, because this rule is access on approval, requires approval, my request is pending. And it's pending whoever we defined as the owner of this data set. In this case, it's the admin that created the rule, and that's me. So either I get this, as an admin, I can get this on Slack, I can get this on an email, or I get it here on the screen. You can see the user, you can see the reason, and you can go in, you can approve, you can deny, you can edit this rule. I'm just going to approve it here. And now if I log back in or view the system as Dave, you can see that I have access to the data. And now if I run my query again, I should see all the sensitive data here because we're not applying any policy on the data itself. This is obviously a bunch of mock data here, so don't worry about it. Awesome. So to summarize, we saw these 3 use cases: support engineers, self-service, and they don't see raw data, sensitive data. We saw engineering needing like a break glass kind of thing to go into production without having to request access, but then we mitigate that by only providing them access to mass data. And the ultimate break glass requires approval. Engineers can get full access to whatever they need on the database and do whatever they need. Everything is time bound, so you don't have to worry about going back and revoking the access, everything is protected by default, by design. All right, so other than when you talk about the Access Manager, other than the ability to go and set all these rules, Access Manager also tracks how compliant you are with protecting customer data. On my demo account, because of some stuff I ran earlier, I'm less compliant. You can see here only 56% of my queries are governed, which means I've ran some queries here that were not associated with any access rule. They were just audited by Satori, but Satori did not control them. What we also get from the Access Manager is the overall access history to data in my environment. And you can see all of the requesting, revoking, the granting, and such that happened in the environment. This is really useful for me to show my auditors everyone that had access, and you'll be able to see here when access is automatically revoked by Satori, you will see a line here that says that access got revoked. In addition to providing audits on who had access and why, Satori also provides really in-depth query level auditing of access. I can see every query to data that was sent through Satori. You can see this is the user, Dave. You can see different information about where he's logging in from. You can see the database and all the rest of the data. Here you don't see any policy enforced on the query because that's the last query we ran. I can look at, here's a query that shows that a policy has been enforced, and these are all the columns that got masked by Satori. You can see these are the two columns that we removed from the masking profile to show you how cool and dynamic this is. I can go on and on a bunch of stuff here on the system, but let's cover your questions. So let me stop sharing my screen and look at what we have here on the Q&A. Cool. So I see a couple of questions here. So the first one, do engineers have to use a web UI to request access to data? It's a great question. They don't have to use the web UI. They can if they want to, and most of them really dig it. We also have integrations with Slack, so they can go into a Slack channel. We have a Slack app where they can select the database, select the access level, and do the same thing that they do from the UI. We also have the same integration also works for the admins that need to approve the request, so they can do it on their phone really easily, hassle-free. We also, everything is API driven, and we also have templates on how to build integrations into Jira, for example. That's very common in the engineering and support use cases. We also have an example of how to do it from Salesforce if you have a support ticket and so on. So they don't have to use the web UI, but that's available. If they want to, they can use other tools. Second question that we have here, what other databases are? We were very focused on AWS RDS Postgres in this example. We do have support for other databases. Let me show you like a quick rundown. So Snowflake, Redshift, Postgres, SQL Server, MySQL, CockroachDB, Athena, Synapse, Greenplum, MariaDB, OpenSearch, BigQuery, and a bunch of other stuff. S3 is really interesting for a lot of folks. So yes, Satori knows how to control access and audit access to all of these different databases. Another question, last one that I'm going to take here. What about deployment options with Satori? So it's a really good question. You can deploy Satori in the way that fits you. You can use it as a complete SaaS service, as I have here in my demo, or you can deploy the data access controller piece of Satori in your environment and manage that. The Satori data access controller is a Kubernetes-based application. We give you a Helm chart to deploy it on a cluster, and you're good to go. And in that case, all your data doesn't leave your environment. It doesn't traverse through our cloud and so on. And I have another question here, so maybe I'll also take this one. Can or should this permissioning layer be used by production applications directly, or is it more designed for a person that queries DB directly? It's a great question. So there's nothing preventing you from using Satori to monitor, control, audit access by applications. We have customers who are doing that. But I would say the sweet spot of Satori is for user access, because that's really where the big pain of controlling access to customer data is. When you have a lot of users who need the dynamic access, sometimes they need this, you need to revoke it, it's time-based, and so on. We also integrate with identity providers to get user and group information, to make it easy for you to maybe use what you have in Okta or other IDPs in your Satori policy. So I would say it's, we do have application use cases, but I think the sweet spot of Satori and the power is really for user-driven access. Cool. So I think we covered everything I wanted to cover, and I'm happy that you all had some really good questions. If you want to learn more about Satori, feel free to go to our website. We have a test drive, which is a fully functional account you can use, pre-configured with common databases like Snowflake and Redshift and Postgres and MySQL and stuff. You can just go and start experimenting with Satori. Feel free to, if you want to learn more, contact us or schedule a demo. We'd be happy to talk to you. And stay tuned to our next webinar, which, if I'm not mistaken, going to be our Chief Scientist, Ben Hertzberg, who's going to talk about more aspects of managing access to customer data. So this has been fun. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.